The Canadian Prime Minister gave a speech today on the world stage in Switzerland. He raised the disruption of the world order. Let's go to Peter Mackay on this, strategic advisor to Deloitte Canada. Do middle powers, sir, need to band together to avoid being on the menu, as the Prime Minister put it?
Well, I think it's certainly a necessary strategy to not become over-reliant on any one big market, not just the United States, but China as well. And certainly you're not seeing investment in Russia, the other big world power. And so it makes a lot of sense, particularly to exercise the comprehensive economic trade agreement we have with the European Union, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. These are all existing trade agreements that allow us to do much more business in many other places. We simply have been complacent about it.
We've talked about how the fact that the U.S. is such a big market, and you mentioned China also a very big market, that they really can't be replaced with other markets for Canada. What do you say to that? Do you agree with that, or do you think a lot more can be done to replace much of what America brings to Canada right now?
Well, I think there's an element of necessity here. But as far as our biggest hindrance to capitalizing on other markets, it's infrastructure and it's energy. Our ability to get liquefied natural gas, other forms of energy into the global supply chain is limited because we've spent 10 years not building pipelines. And of course, the Prime Minister has to answer some of that himself as a financial advisor and a proponent of green energy at the UN on behalf of the Liberal government. But we have to move now and quickly. And I think that's what he is attempting to do, and making friends and partners and cutting deals in other parts of the world makes perfect sense. But we have to mind our own fences here at home. And that means moving quickly to break down interprovincial trade barriers and getting shovels in the ground and pipelines in the ground, quite frankly. That is really the only way we're going to be able to exercise these demons of complacency and over-reliance on the Americans.
Do you feel like the call out by the Prime Minister was solely based on an economic outlook, or was it also based on a military alliance? We know NATO stands, but clearly America is threatening a country that belongs to a NATO ally. So was this more a call or a wider call to include perhaps a new military alliance?
Well, it's a very, very troubling time, to be sure. And the actions of the words, at least of the American president thus far, have a lot of people trying to unpack what this means for the NATO alliance, of which Canada is a founding member. But also, we should never forget we're members of NORAD here in North America. And so the military-to-military discussions that continue, there is some solace. Those relationships are solid. But of course, the commander-in-chief is making threats to other countries, using tariffs as leverage. There may be a path forward to try to turn this into a joint exercise to protect the Arctic. And that has always been my contention, that we have to work with not only the Americans, but other Arctic Council countries to fortify the Arctic. And perhaps this is a test case with Greenland. The Americans have a base in Greenland. If we work with them instead of trying to pretend we would defend against them, this may be the way forward. And it may, again, be an example of Donald Trump trying to leverage the NATO countries, which he did quite effectively to get countries to agree to 2% and now 5% of GDP spending on defense.
Okay, so if these are threats used as a negotiating tactic for Donald Trump, which we know is what he likes to do, is it a fair negotiating tactic?
Well, no. And I think the Prime Minister rightly has called this out in somewhat delicate language. And, talking about aligning with allies is one thing. Some would say doing it from a podium in Davos is aligning with elites. But I do give him credit for giving a clear recitation of where we find ourselves today and saying, nostalgia is not a plan. And I agree with that. But so too are the announcements of military spending until they become reality, until the money is budgeted for. Talking about there being sort of a fiscal capacity is simply not true, frankly, where we find ourselves economically. And so it's the show me era. We want to see the actual investments coming before we're able to say in honesty to our NATO allies and our NORAD partners that we are actually making these investments, purchasing equipment, and preparing for this brave new world. And that, of course, includes a serious threat from China, who the Prime Minister did refer to as Canada's largest security threat just a few months ago.
Okay. You talked about NATO and the questions about will NATO stand. At what point does NATO come undone if you see a pivot, perhaps when and if the U.S. decides to go militarily into Greenland?
Well, that would breach Article 5, and it would call for all other NATO members, all 31, including Canada, to come to the defense of, in this case, Denmark, of which Greenland is part. And so that would literally be the undoing and lead to some other future alliance. It's apocryphal to even contemplate. And yet the fact that we're having this discussion, as are many, just demonstrates what a disruptor and what an accelerator of disunity this president has been.
Okay, very quickly, I'm wondering if you think Canada needs to ramp up its own concept of what it will be like to fight for the sovereignty of this country.
Well, I think you will find in the halls of Ottawa there are quiet discussions happening, and the announced plans by the Prime Minister to invest much more. And yet, I want to be hopeful, but plans to purchase submarines and plans to purchase a new fighter aircraft, make these investments in an accelerated fashion, don't happen without budget. And we're borrowing on an overdrawn account, quite frankly, Muriel. That's where we are. So generating the wealth and the prosperity in this country predominantly through the export of our resources is the only way we can pay for it without putting ourselves in further fiscal trouble or deep water for a future generation. So yes, everything is go fast, accelerate, try to strip away some of the bureaucratic and red tape hurdles. And I believe that we are in what they say in football is a hurry up offense, and we have to do it.
Peter Mackay, appreciate you joining us on the program today. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.